Okay, welcome to Sinead and Isaac's podcast. Today,
This is episode 1.
episode 1, we are Sinead and Isaac.
Yep.
And today we were going to talk about Isaac's story.
Isaac's story, indeed.
So, Isaac, I have known you my whole life, and it has
You
been
have indeed.
fantastic.
I'm glad.
But I guess what I think people would be most interested to hear about is your coming out story. So, for starters, I guess let's backtrack and go to what life was like as a child for Isaac, being raised in a family that was, would you say, fundamentalist? Bordering on that.
I definitely kind of strong religious beliefs. I mean, specifically if we're talking about, coming out, and especially sort of through the realization of being gay. I mean, like, obviously a lot of stuff was taught to us, where we just kind of were taught it and believed it without thinking through it and trying to work out, does this apply to me or does it apply to other people?
Well, what are some of the things that you were taught that maybe in the beginning you believed because, we were raised religious, and then at what point did you start to think, oh, that's, it doesn't make sense?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of stuff, really.
Yeah.
For me, to be honest, my first biggest sort of issues always came up regarding just like science and understanding and knowledge.
Oh, okay.
Because I was always very scientifically inclined, logically inclined. I loved, school. Looking at physics and chemistry and even biology and things like that. And it was kind of like there was always this kind of disconnect because it was like I was learning physics and chemistry, and it just seemed to make so much sense and fit so perfectly, and it didn't disagree with. It sort of didn't fundamentally disagree with, the sort of the religious stuff that we were taught growing up. However, when I started to move towards biology and things like that, again, everything in biology just made so much sense, except for then it came to evolution, and I was like, I had a real struggle because obviously grew up learning evolution, that's not actually what happened, and it was, all created through the Bible.
Creation,
yeah, that's right. And then to kind of think, well, why does everything else make sense?
Yeah.
And this other thing that seems to fit with everything that's saying, but just suddenly doesn't fit.
Yes.
Like there was a lot of kind of like cognitive dissonance in that sort of sense.
Yes, and I remember as well specifically thinking all of these like side stories to make that make sense, like thinking to myself, yes, the scientific community is deliberately trying to indoctrinate the entirety of humanity just so that people don't know about God.
I mean, I never really thought that way, just because everything else in the scientific community just seemed to make so much sense to me.
Yeah.
And so I thought, clearly they're just blind at in this way or whatever. I never thought there was any sort of maliciousness happening.
I definitely went down the malicious route.
But like, it just kind of stopped making sense and finding more and more inconsistencies with the Bible and what we were being taught and things like that, and then with what was actually happening in the real world and what scientific community and stuff were saying, and kind of like I'd always had questions and things like that. And I remember even going once with Dad to a debate between a young Earth creationist and an old Earth creationist. So somebody who believes the Earth was created in 6 days and finished on the 7th, and then someone else who said the Earth was likely to be potentially millions of years old, and that this was the way that, and everything that the old Earth creationist said made 10 times more sense.
Oh no.
And he had evidence, like actual sources and citations and things to back up what he was saying. The young Earth creationist was just kind of faffing on and saying this is what the Bible says, this is that, and the other, and if you're trying to prove the Bible,
Yep.
you don't use the Bible as a source.
Yep.
You can't do that. You can't use that with any book. Any book. If you try and back up what a book says or any source says, you can't use that source as its evidence. Like, that's just not how that works, because it's just doesn't make sense. And so I kind of found it, at that point, that was kind of my like first realization that actually what the Bible and everything the Bible says is perhaps not true. And I remember even talking about this with Dad and stuff like that, and we sort of came to the conclusion, I guess, in one sense, that that it doesn't actually matter how God created the earth.
Yes.
But that it's just more that,
Yes.
God loves you or whatever, and there's always this other stuff.
I do remember as well, because I was so hardline young earth creationist.
Yeah.
You know what I was like.
Yeah,
I had my posse of young people who were semi-religious, who I grabbed into my little thing of let's debate the science teacher because we know that God created the earth.
Yeah.
And I watched Dad do something similar with somebody else who came into the family one time. They were talking about the Bible and they're like, oh, well, obviously the earth wasn't created in 6 days because that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And it's maybe it's analogy for something else, or maybe it's poetry or something like that. And Dad just didn't fight it or didn't push the issue and was just like, oh, all that matters is, God loves us and all this. Right. And I was like, well, when you've staked so much on this young earth creationism and stuff, and you realize that Dad isn't even...
Yeah, and to be honest, I think that actually has a lot of an impact on I guess that gives a lot of context as to sort of how this sort of stuff works as well, is that it's not even necessarily that Mum and Dad were teaching us this stuff directly.
Yes.
It's just that you grow up in that culture and you learn things from other people or even on the internet and things like that, and you kind of just absorb things, and because you kind of have this idea that you guys and anything in this circle must be said, it must be true.
Yes.
That you just kind of
that's
absorb it and
right.
take
You
it on
absorb
board.
it, and then it becomes the echo chamber. Like, you're right. Like, I don't think Mum and Dad explicitly said to us, the earth is definitely created in 6 days.
No.
But when I heard that from the Christian community, then I started echoing it back to my parents and back to you and back to my brothers.
Exactly.
And it just becomes that echo chamber of this is clearly the more logical thing.
Yeah. Even though we were like 10 and had no idea what logic was.
Yeah, but we thought it was smart as scientists.
It was kind of, that kind of, I guess, gives a bit of a context. And I mean, coming back to kind of, I guess, my coming out then, with that kind of, that context, I mean, again, it was sort of like through my teens or whatever, realizing that I was gay.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot of kind of difficult times and internal battles and things like that. But there were definitely times where I struggled internally and was like praying to God every night that he'd sort of take these feelings away from me. And I mean, clearly, nothing ever happened.
Yeah. Except for unnecessary stress and anxiety about
Exactly.
that couldn't happen.
Then moving forward to when I was like sort of 16, 17, 18 sort of thing. At this point, I was, living with family friends outside of home. And I was, I guess at that point, I stopped trying to not be gay. I was just kind of not telling anybody.
Yeah, just not talking about it.
But I guess I'd sort of already, I would say honestly, kind of internally stopped believing in God and kind of already accepted, evolution and, me being gay as a thing. And I just kind of like was just not talking about it, I guess.
Yeah.
And I think, partly me accepting that I was gay kind of came about more easily because I had sort of already accepted that like these sorts of things outside of the Bible kind of already are true. So, there's no point kind of holding that back.
Yeah.
Nothing really came to light until things started to become relevant. I'd kind of then, I was 19 at the time and was at university and things like that, and meet a cute guy or whatever, and the rest is history, I guess. But when shit hit the fan, I guess, in some ways, that was when stuff came out. But at that point, I think a lot of people, especially Mum and Dad, thought that this was still an internal battle in me,
Yes.
but it wasn't.
Well, that was a bit confusing even for me because, like, I heard this whole thing third, fourth hand.
Yeah.
Because, you know, when things become uncomfortable in the family, people
That's right.
don't talk about it quite so openly.
No, but they don't talk about it openly, but they will talk about it, and it will get spread to every single person.
Yes.
But we don't talk about it.
What I heard, and again, you're right, the whole family assumed that you were going through a much bigger internal battle, like, you know, maybe he's struggling with his sexuality rather than he has come out as gay. But what I actually heard specifically is Isaac says he's bisexual.
Yeah.
And in my mind, what that just interpreted as, who cares, just date a girl, get married to a woman and move on with your life. Like, why is everybody upset about this? And I, at that point, was rocky in my religious faith as well. But definitely...
I mean, at that point, I think I had said to people that I was bisexual.
Yes,
partly to soften the blow.
Yeah.
Partly also because I guess internally, while I say I was aware and knowing the fact that I was attracted to men, I had sort of always, I guess, still had, I guess this was the part that I guess might have been a bit of a struggle, was that I'd always thought that perhaps there was still a chance that I could have a relationship with a woman.
Yeah.
Kind of realizing, no, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But there was always kind of like that thought. And that was something that was brought up by Dad, and was like, you know, is this something that you would want to pursue? And you know, there was, to be honest, I mean, I think Dad knew
right
from the beginning that I wasn't actually bisexual.
Yeah.
He was very good to begin with.
Yeah.
When he first found out, like, you know, he sat me down and actually sort of, we just spoke through the options of, you know, where my life could take me and things like that. And I even remember having this discussion about, like, you know, what do you want in the future in your family and things like that. And then saying, I was like, well, you know, I think at some point I would like to have kids and things like that. And he was talking about like how, you know, even if you were in a relationship with a man, you could still adopt and start a family and things like that. And I was kind of surprised by that. I haven't really heard anything so supportive from him since. But yeah, I was kind of just like a bit, I guess it was kind of good for that first bit. But
yeah.
Mum's reaction was different.
Yep.
She really is like, I mean, much more emotional.
Yep.
And again, I mean, a bit of context. When I first sort of came out to people, I didn't actually come out to Mum and Dad directly in person.
Yeah.
I told Saray, who I was living with at the time, and I asked her to speak to Mum and Dad. Because I was just sort of shy. I didn't, you know, I don't like confrontation. I mean, Saray's an absolutely lovely lady and just a gem. And she had no sort of judgment or reaction to begin with. She was very much just sort of sit down and listen to what I had to say. And that was very, very helpful. And so I asked her to kind of let Mum and Dad know, because I didn't really have the confidence to do that at the time.
Yeah.
And I don't regret that. That was sort of, you know, I know some people would probably say it's better off to say these sorts of things in person. And look, perhaps it is, but I don't know. I don't regret how it happened.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it was kind of, I think, the first time as well, kind of talking with Dad, he had already kind of had some time to think about the way he was going to talk to me for the first time. I mean, look, I'm pretty sure actually I said to Saray to tell Dad. I didn't tell her to tell Mum. And I'm pretty sure she did just tell Dad, and then Dad told Mum.
Yeah.
Of course. Anyway, so my first interaction with Mum, after I'd sort of come out and stuff, I mean, she come to visit and, you know, asked to sit down and have a chat with me or whatever. And basically, one of the first things she says to me, basically, is that if you choose to follow this, you're going to hell. Tactful. And it was like, you know, the first thing she said to me, I was ready to go into that conversation kind of open.
Yeah.
But as soon as somebody says something like that,
Yeah.
They just close up. And I'm just like, no,
there's nothing to
that's it.
say after
There's
that.
nothing.
Yeah.
And she was sort of saying things like, you know, oh, is it somebody from university? You're going to have to pull out of uni. You can't, you know, you shouldn't be studying anymore. And I'm like, well, that's not going to happen, Mum.
Yeah.
I don't, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for imposing rules
right.
that are just not.
It is actually somebody that does go to the same university to me. That's not how I met them. I didn't meet them from uni and stuff like that. And it's like, you haven't actually spoken to me, you know, about... You haven't shown love and compassion in this situation.
Yeah.
So I, you know, again, right from that day, speaking to Mum, kind of had this barrier up with her. After that, I mean, Mum and Dad had then organised to have a meeting with me, have a discussion, and wanted to sit down and talk about stuff with me. Basically, I mean, in this discussion, there were a lot of things said, but it was kind of like, again, I think they had still thought that it was kind of a bit more of an internal conflict with me.
And there was things still up in the air kind of thing.
Yeah, and so they kind of, in some sense, well, they did. They said to me at one point, it's like, if you're going to they kind of gave me two options, right? I either work through my sexuality and my relationship with God, and because also at this point I'd basically sort of said to them as well that I don't really believe in God either.
Yeah.
At this point as well, so all of that sort of stuff had come up at the same time, and so they had sort of said, like, you know, you can kind of stay within the house church community and continue living with Frank and Saray and sort of work through your sexuality, or we think you should probably leave the house church, and that kind of also meant move out from where I was currently staying. And it was no question in my mind that I was going to leave.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't think they expected that. I think they expected that I would stay. Because I think they, like I said, they still thought it was an internal conflict in that, you know, I would want the support from people and stuff like that. And look, I did probably want support and things like that, but
you couldn't not be gay.
That's right. Right. And I was also, you know, I was ready, in some senses, I was also ready to kind of, well, I thought I was sort of potentially ready to move out anyway, because I wanted to move out, to move closer to university. And so that was kind of a bit of a shock to them. Also, during that sort of conversation, basically said that they were going to tell everybody and and deal with kind of like, you know, tell all the extended family and you know, the house church, so that we can get people praying and stuff like that, which of course I don't really want. I wasn't really ready for everybody to know. And that really also did kind of, I mean, it just kind of helped ostracize me from the house church even more.
Right.
Because it was just like, now I don't even want to interact with other people because I don't know whether it's going to be, you know, an inflammatory discussion. Yep. And so I just moved away and kind of kept my distance. And again, I think they were kind of shocked by that. They didn't expect it. But I was sort of like, what you really wanted was for me to stay, but enforcing your own rules on me.
Yeah.
I didn't.
I mean, I remember hearing about it, but I remember not... I think the first time I heard about it, I was still definitely religious. It was when you came out as bisexual, I was definitely religious. By the time shit started hitting the fan and you started being ostracized and, well, you know, pushed to the edges and moving out and all of that, I don't think I was religious at that point, but I was definitely going through a lot of turmoil of my own, and I definitely didn't have a lot of extra thought for you kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I do remember I was married and you caught up with me to talk about it, and you said, you know, something along the lines of, you know, how do you feel that I'm gay or something like that.
Yeah.
And I remember quite distinctly pulling away and being like, look, I was raised religious and I don't know how to deal with this.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, I had never met a gay person I respected up until that point.
Yeah.
And that sounds so horrific, but it's the truth. I had never once in my entire life had to consider gay people as, like, people. You know what I mean? Because I was in this religious community. I had been told all these lies about gay people.
Yeah.
Even after I came out of the religion, my mind was like, well, I don't know much about them. I don't care about them. I don't have that struggle. And I never considered it. And when you came to me and asked for my response, I mean, it was only probably a couple weeks later I suddenly felt guilty. I was like, what are you thinking, Sinead? Like, why would you say that to him? Like, he's your little brother. You know he doesn't have any ill intentions. You know he's not doing this for clout. You know he's not doing it, like, all these things that you thought, like, gay people, you know, this idea of how all young people are turning gay for attention and all that kind of stuff. And I was just like, but you know your little brother wouldn't do that. Yeah. So don't think about that kind of thing. And I do remember almost as soon as my husband kind of was in India and left the scene and everything, I feel as though I suddenly became quite a bit more supportive and was much more open and happy to talk about it and just more quickly got over it. But yeah, I do want to say sorry for my initial reaction because I do feel guilty about that. But yeah, that was my first confrontation with a gay person who I actually cared about and actually had to think about. Yeah,
and it is true. Like, any sort of queer person that we'd interacted with previously, we were interacting with them because they had sort of come to mum and dad for spiritual guidance or whatever, and so they were already kind of like, they were the non-religious, they were the sinful, and the
and they need help.
And they need help. That's right.
And gay people need help. That's the thing.
And again, I think that did sort of help fuel a bit of an internal struggle as well. You know, again, growing up thinking that, you know, gay people, you know, need help. They're the sinful people and stuff like that.
Yep.
And then realizing, oh shit, that's me.
Yeah.
You know, like,
yeah.
It was tough at some points. Yeah. And also, like, you know, I mean, I was a fairly reserved kid. Yes. Yeah. And so I also just, like, I remember mum and dad and stuff at times being like, why didn't you come to us and talk to us about it? And I was like, well, I didn't come to anybody and talk to anybody about anything.
Yes.
But also, like, you know, little kids know, it's like any sort of kid, as soon as they think that they've done something wrong, they're not going to go and admit it to their parents.
Yeah.
They're going to try and hide it.
Yes.
And, you know, you kind of created a situation where
it was wrong.
Where it was wrong. And so, of course, I'm just going to hide it and kind of deal with that internally, which is kind of not healthy for a young teen.
Healthy. Yeah. I think as well, I mean, like, I've thought about how many times mum or dad has said something to me like, well, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you talk to me? And now my internal response is instantly, why didn't you ask?
Yeah.
And I especially when I think back to our childhood, I feel as though both of us were quite introverted. Every time there was drama, every time anything was difficult, just go back into our rooms and not confront anybody. And it was exacerbated by the religious thought process, like, as, you know, I bring up a lot, you know, that those concepts of you need to be more loving, you need to be more forgiving. Okay, well, this is a struggle that I can't cope with, so I'm just going to remove myself so that I don't have to deal with feelings of anger and feelings of confrontation and all that kind of thing. And so I think that mum and dad assumed that we were always good, because that's all we ever would present to the world. But at some point, I mean, now that I have nieces and nephews, I know for a fact that I'm going to make a deliberate effort to ask them about more important things. And of course, I can't overstep my boundaries because I am an auntie and they have their parents. But I know now that that is something that I have to work on, because that wasn't something I was good at. That wasn't something I was trained to do. I'm not good at expressing my feelings, and I'm not good at having emotional moments with people, and definitely not good at confrontation. But now as an adult, I have to deliberately work on those things so that my niece and nephew have somebody who do come to them and ask before they struggle internally for 10 years, and then
that's right.
And then everybody tells them, why didn't you say anything?
And look, it's important to have people in your life like that, and it's even like one thing that is kind of said in the gay community and the queer community and stuff a lot is that, like, part of kind of being out and proud is not liberation for yourself, it's liberation for the people who don't have the support and don't have the ability to you know, because even since coming out, I've had several people, you know, either kind of close come and speak to me for guidance.
Yes.
And I'm just like, I'm not a font of knowledge here. You know, my life is in shambles in many ways,
Yeah.
but like I'm the only person who is out and proud, I guess. And so, and that's necessary for some people because there often are people that, often it's just kind of not, people don't have those people around.
Yes. I really, really, really love that sentiment of, the pride is not just for me, it's for the people who can't be proud. And that is one thing I've often thought about when I think about like the few people in my life who I've tried to help or I've tried to love or whatever. Like in my mind, I don't want you to look up to me. I want you to go out there and be happy.
Yeah.
And I want you to express that happiness and live the way that you feel is best to live, because especially it's like, because I know so many people who can't express themselves, who can't do the things that they want to do. And when you live in a society where people can, then it makes it easier for individuals who can't, because now there are people you can go to and there's people you can talk to.
That's right.
There's a lot that this opens up, touching on religious issues and
definitely
community and society and
definitely. I mean, there's so much more, and it kind of is obviously one part of my life or whatever, but and one part of your life, but obviously it affects and influences everything in our lives.
Yeah. No, it reminds me of something I remember when I was a Christian. I used to think a lot, which was, why do gay people need to constantly flaunt their sexuality? They're already accepted in society, and now here I am on the other side, and I realize, well, the problem is that individuals aren't accepted into families. Yeah. And so they have to talk about their experience, because lots of people have that experience.
I mean, and the thing is as well, gay people yes, they are more accepted in society now than they have been in the past, and for a lot of queer people, they never really, like, a lot of queer people these days don't have to deal with kind of confrontation or and things like that, but there are still people who do. Yeah, and I remember it is quite a common sentiment. I mean, I even know I've had straight co-workers and stuff in the past say, I'm supportive of queer people, of gay people and stuff like that, but why do they have to flaunt their lifestyle and things like that?
Yeah.
I think I remember I was potentially working and I was wearing like a rainbow ring or something like that. And I was like, well, me wearing this ring doesn't flaunt my lifestyle any more than you wearing a wedding ring.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like...
Or anything else.
That's right. And it's like, but... by actually having a rainbow ring or something like that, it will show to other people around, or other potentially queer people who perhaps can't wear a wedding, a rainbow ring because they might have family and stuff like that might not agree with it. To show them that actually there are other people around serving you food or other things that functional members of society, who are just like you, and there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. And so that's sort of why it's important.
Yes, exactly. It's the same sentiment with, well, I understand that you don't believe in God, but don't criticize religion. It's like, well, the problem with that is that my whole life I've been religious. I was indoctrinated. Yeah. It changed the way I thought. It changed everything I did. It changed my decision making. How can you tell me that I'm not allowed to criticize that? Yeah. I don't care that this is a secular society and the majority of people aren't religious anymore or whatever, anything like that. Because I went through that experience, and there are still lots of people who go through that experience.
Exactly.
And as you say, like, I would like for them to be able to come to me and talk about that.
That's
because
right.
There's a lot to talk about.
That's right. Yeah, there is. It's also, like, one thing, and this is something that I've thought about, is that, like, and again, why it's so important to kind of have this pride, I guess, is, again, because for the vast majority of minorities, people are born into a family of that minority. Whether that is, an ethnic minority or a religious minority or, any sort of other minority, even a lot of disabilities and things like that. A lot of them are genetic, while there are a vast number that aren't as well. Like if you're in an ethnic minority in a country, you're more likely you'll have been born from your parents. Your parents will raise you, and that you then kind of have that community support around you. Yeah. People who are queer are not born into queer families.
No. And they're not born into all the liberal families either.
That's right. Queer people are born into every family.
Yes.
No matter how conservative or not. And so that's why it's extra important for society to be accepting of them.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to have the support. They're not necessarily going to have the support of their immediate family, or have people around them who are going to understand the difficulties that they're going through.
Have to deliberately seek that out.
That's right.
As a second quest in life after they're fully grown.
That's right. Got any final comments, Sinead, on our first podcast?
It was good. I think even for me, like, I know you know my brother, but I haven't heard your full story laid out like that, so that was good to hear from my side. Yeah, but as I said, there's a lot that can be touched on and brought up further and discussed. Kind of opens the full can of worms, you know.
That's right. That's right. I mean, that's right. It's going to be I'm going to be candid about a lot of things. I have no need to hold back. You know, I went through my whole childhood and teen years lying and hiding myself.
Yep. No point anymore.
No point anymore. All right then. Well, I guess well, say anybody who's been watching next time. I don't know. We'll have a name for this podcast at some point, and
or we won't ever. And it will just be the Isaac and Sinead candid discussions. Yep.
Weekly about various different things.
Yep. And if you have any suggestions, what you would like to hear us talk about, definitely write that in the comments below, and we may or may not ever read it or get to it.
We will endeavour to read them and get to them at some point.
Yes.